Well, I'm delighted to introduce that Tom Dietterich is going to share some of his knowledge and experience with us today. Over the years, I've gotten bits and pieces of some of the interesting research projects he and his students have worked on, but must admit I've never quite understood what he did or how he did it. So I'm looking forward to learning more. So I think Tom is going to take charge and talk about questions and the format. So Tom, it's all yours.
Okay, well, thank you for the invitation. I'm afraid, Anna Grace, that even after this, you won't know much about what I did because I'm mostly
Okay.
trying to give an overview of the whole field rather
Okay.
than specifically plugging my work. So I thought I would break this talk up into three parts. The first is about what is artificial intelligence. We hear the term thrown around all the time, and it's been, let's say, an academic marketing term since about 1955, 56, something like that. And so, but I'll give an overview of what today we as computer scientists, what we think artificial intelligence, what the term means. And then, of course, the most visible form of AI is the large language models like ChatGPT, the Google AI summaries, Bing Copilot. You see the little twinkly icon popping up everywhere, including we have an AI companion, I guess I can choose for this meeting. So I'll talk about that. And then I'll try to talk about sort of alternative visions for what the future of the world will be with artificial intelligence technology more involved. Let's see, and I guess I have, as a professor, I can talk for the whole hour, but I think it'd be a lot more fun if people have specific questions. If you interrupt me and ask them or put them in the chat, I'm happy to be very flexible. So it's hard to do with Zoom, but we'll do our best to make that work. Okay, so what is artificial intelligence? Well, it's really a large range of things. I think it was mostly the sort of key moments when people got excited about artificial intelligence really happened back in before we even had computers, back in the 1930s. Some people, some researchers thought, well, it's been a long-standing question in Western civilization, particularly about how is thought something that is mechanical, or is it something that is inherently human and requires whatever the biochemicals and so on in our brains are to do. But coming out of World War II, there were a lot of developments in the mathematics of optimization and information theory. The field of computer science was being born. And so people started to think about, well, how could we build a computer that could think in some sense? And that's blossomed into a whole lot of things, particularly considering not only sort of a pure thinking machine, say something that could play chess or prove mathematical theorems, but something that could also understand the world in terms of understanding language and music and maybe being able to play chess and maybe being able to compose songs or manipulate the world like a robot could, actually interact physically with the world. Fold our laundry in particular seems to be a popular task. So, nowadays we think of it as these various things. So one of these is so-called knowledge-based systems. And if you've ever used automatic tax filing software, you know that it asks you questions and starts filling out your tax forms, and then depending on your answers, it asks you other questions and eventually completes your taxes for you. That's an example of something called an expert system. And we call it a knowledge-based system because it's not the computing part that's difficult. It doesn't have to solve complex systems of equations or run some giant simulation. They're just hundreds or thousands of rules that describe the tax law and regulations, and it needs to find a path through all those rules that is the correct path for you. And the same applies to business workflows of all kinds, purchasing requests, and so on. Information extraction. So over here on the right, I've drawn or snapped what is known in Google as an info box. And Google has built what's called a knowledge graph that contains information. So if you look up Albert Einstein in Google search, you'll get this summary at the top, which is typically pulled out of Wikipedia. And then you'll get a bunch of facts about him, you know, born, died, influenced by spouse, children, and so on. And if you go and look at the actual knowledge graph, this is, I pulled out some parts of it from actually something called Wikidata, which is an open source knowledge graph. Google's is proprietary. We call this a graph in computer science. It consists of these things called nodes and things called arrows or links or edges. And so Albert Einstein is a node, and he's an instance of human beings, which is another node. His sex is male. His academic thesis title was a new determination of molecular dimensions, which I see I spelled wrong. And it came out in 1905, which is an example of a point in time. And then here are notable works among them from the page. So this is knowledge that has actually been manually encoded there. So people that build Wikipedia, build Wikidata, build this. And of course, now people are interested in using other techniques to automatically update these knowledge graphs. But in any case, that's where these answers come from, is a knowledge graph. And again, the computation is trivial. You go and look up the node for Albert Einstein, and then you just follow the edges to find all of the things that about him and then describe them. Whoops. The last kind of knowledge-based system are recommendation systems. So if you've used Netflix, who really pioneered the idea of making predictions for what movies you would like based on movies you've already seen, based on your ratings of those movies, and based on what everybody else has looked at. And so you get that classic, you know, people like you have liked this other movie, so maybe you would like it. And so that's also an example of a recommender system, of a knowledge-based system. So these are all manipulating information and knowledge. And we use knowledge, maybe that's an overblown term for this. It's structured information. Okay, another AI area is optimizing industrial processes. So if you talk to people who work on shipping like UPS and FedEx, or the airlines that have to do airline crew scheduling. I did some research for NASA several years ago. And you typically have a scheduling problem where you have various tasks that need to be performed, and they have prerequisites. So in this case, this is task 8, and its size is how long it will take to complete. And these dashed arrows indicate the tasks that have to be done first. So we have to do T5 before we can do T7, and we need to do T3 before we do T7, and so on. And so ideally, the way I've got them laid out would be the shortest possible schedule, because it satisfies all of the prerequisites that we finish doing task 5 before we start doing task 7. However, these tasks might conflict because they might both need the same thing, like they both might need a forklift and a forklift operator. And so that turns out you can't do task 1 and task 7 at the same time because you only have one forklift. So then you have to start stretching out the schedule so that you can resolve those conflicts. Anyway, this is used all the time, and we can now schedule industrial operations far beyond what humans could do without the use of computers. So now we're getting into something that takes significant computation to solve. Another area that I think has been, had a huge impact is natural language processing. So obviously, if you've ever used Google Translate, you can translate from any of hundreds of languages into and out of English into each other. And one of my, I think, coolest apps ever developed is Google Translate from images. So you can turn on your camera, hold it up to a sign, and it will attempt to sort of modify the picture so that you still have the same sign and the same background, but now it's in English instead of Spanish in this case. It's really, it has some interesting problems with the font sizes. It looks a little bit like a ransom note, but otherwise it's really great. Another area is computer vision and computer graphics. And so if you've done any travel through, say, TSA now or or leaving and re-entering the United States, you have to go through face recognition. And this is generally viewed quite with some concern, I would say, in computer science, because any biometric property, like your face, is something you can never change. It's not like a password. And so if it gets stolen and released, you lose privacy as a result. But there are other things that use computer vision. We'll talk about self-driving cars in a bit. But we now have image captioning. In fact, here in Zoom, you can turn on image captioning and it will be doing, well, actually, I guess that's more about speech transcription. But you can use your phone to take a picture of something like a plant or an animal or a bird. Ask Google, what is this? And it can tell you what it is. And image synthesis. So, and then of course there's self-driving cars and other robots. So I had my first ride in a Waymo robot car in March this year in Phoenix, and it's quite something. That it has things called lidars and radars and cameras all over it, so that it can perceive the world around it. So that's combining computer vision to understand the world. But then it has to predict the future behavior of every, what they call, actor in the scene, every other car, every other person, pedestrians, bicyclists, dogs, and so on, deer. And then it needs to plan a trajectory for how it's going to continue to make progress toward its goals without hitting anything. And then it has to control the car to actually execute that trajectory. And it needs to do it all in just a few milliseconds. So it's quite challenging to do this fully autonomously. And even with these cars, there are backup human operators sort of supervising cars so that you can call on them to get out of a jam if the car makes a mistake. So and then there are scientific applications. So I think personally what I'm most excited about are these. Google famously, Google DeepMind developed a program called AlphaFold that could take the so-called amino acid sequence, which is how your cells encode a protein to be manufactured, and then those go through something called the ribosome, which actually assembles the protein molecule, which can be a very complicated shape. And it's very difficult, given only the amino acid sequence, to know what shape the protein will take. And this is very important if that protein is a protein on, say, the coronavirus, and you want to design a drug to modify, to bind to this thing and plug it up so it can't work. You need to know this shape. So they can now predict these structures, not perfectly, but well enough to really help biologists and scientists make progress toward designing drugs and understanding how the chemistry of life works. And so I think we'll see many more advances in drug design now, very rapid advances, and also in material science, where it's not about biological molecules, but physical molecules, say for designing catalysts for removing carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, or making industrial processes more efficient, less polluting, and so on and so forth. And then last of all, games have been, as I mentioned, even before we had computers, people started thinking about, well, could a computer play chess, and could it play perfect chess? Or in Asia, there was a lot more interest in Go. Poker has been very interesting because, unlike chess and Go, those are games where there are secrets. Each person has their hand, which is hidden. And so it was quite a shock when Google DeepMind was able to build a system called AlphaGo that could defeat the world champion in the game of Go. Nowadays, we're seeing artificial intelligence applied to design new games, like video games, design new levels, and make them interesting for you individually. So sort of customized computer gaming. Okay, well, so that's kind of a survey of all the different parts of AI these days, and a lot of it is more or less invisible to you. The things that are happening inside the Google search engine. We've become accustomed, I think, now to having tools in our smartphones that can take images and then touch up the images and make them nice, and those are all AI-based tools. Okay, but obviously, just in the last 5 years, there's been the development of these things called large language models. And so, and these are the ChatGPT and the Google AI summaries and so on. So, what is a language model? Well, it's a representation of the sequences of words that appear in a language. So, mathematically, we would say the language English consists of all the possible sentences you could ever say in English. And that doesn't, not all possible sequences of words are English. I mean, if we said that words of sequences of representation, reading backwards, that's not an English sentence. So the order matters, and so on and so forth. So I'm going to work my way toward large language models by giving you examples of three simpler kinds of language models: unigram models, bigram models, and trigram models. So a unigram model just asks, what is the frequency of each word? How common is the word what? How common is the word model? Bigram models look at pairs of words, and trigram models look at triples of words. And so let's look at those models. So to make simple models, I downloaded the entire text of The Adventures of Sherlock Holmes and the Casebook of Sherlock Holmes. And these are available online now. They're out of copyrights, of course. So you can take this text and then compute statistics on them. And so from this, we can then generate a random English sentence from a unigram model. We'll skip that and just look at, so here are the frequencies, the number of times each of these words appears in these two books by Arthur Conan Doyle. So the most common word is actually the period. I made it its own word. And then the word the is most common: I, and, a, to, of, it, that, in, and so on. And you can see these are almost all just function words and prepositions, pronouns. It takes us a long time to get down to the word Holmes, which is, I think, the only real noun here, right? So that's those are the first, I think, what do I have here? The first 8x4, 32 most common words in this particular text. So now, if we wanted to try to use this language model to actually generate a sentence in English, what we could do is randomly choose words out of this list, which goes on for 3,000 or 4,000 words, and choose words in proportion to their probabilities, in proportion to their frequencies. And when we do that, we get something like this: Piperack that, period. Of the two, and can it in he wings, that upstream own hat old. First is Hat Watson, anatomy bin I sitting room, period, and so on. So you can see this is complete nonsense. It's certainly not English. But, and the order is completely arbitrary, right? There's no, because we're just saying, well, we generated Piperack because that had some frequency. Then we generated that because it had some frequency. Then we generated period because that had some frequency. But they don't depend on each other at all. So if you completely reverse this, it would have exactly the same likelihood of being generated. Okay, but now let's consider generating text from the bigram model. So I didn't show a picture of it, but now we're looking at all pairs of words in sequence. And so if we take a sentence like a long professional beggar, period, we have to generate the A from our unigram model. But then, knowing A, we consider all pairs of words where the first word is A, and we choose among those one of those pairs, and in this case we get a long. Now that we have long, we look for all pairs of words where the first word is long and the second word is something else, and we choose professional. And then once we have professional, we choose beggar. Once we have beggar, we choose period. So now we get things that are a little bit more coherent. And you, from the necessary permits, this fellow, period. Head of deduction that you make of a pretext, said Miss Violet de Merville coldly. So that's pretty cool. Miss Violet de Merville must be, Miss Violet and Violet Day and de Merville. Those must all be the only possibilities for those pairs. So once it's chosen Miss, it's going to generate the rest. Although here's Miss Mary, so I guess I'm lying there. There must be a couple of possibilities after the word Miss. Okay, when we get to trigram models, now we're looking where we choose the next word based on the two preceding words. And this starts to actually read more like English. Possible I made up my spirits and feeling that I would call here tomorrow evening. I know you well. She walked into the matter. Okay, so now that's a good example where she walked into is a perfectly fine triple. Walked into the is a fine triple. Into the matter is fine, but walking into the matter doesn't make any sense. So the trouble is that by the time we're choosing the word matter, we've lost track of the fact that we had chosen the verb walked. And so you get things like, so I think that her dowry will run to considerably over the telephone directory, right? And again, this is, it's pretty coherent until you get to telephone directory, which has lost the context. So you can see that if you could make 4-gram models, 5-gram models, no, in general they're called n-gram models, and you could make them long enough, you could probably generate pretty good English. The trouble is that whereas unigram models, there's only you only need statistics for each word, and so there are whatever 30,000 words in English. For the bigrams, we're now talking about 30,000 times 30,000, right? Which is what, 900 million. And with trigrams, there are even more possibilities. By the time you get to n-grams, there are astronomically many combinations of n-grams, and most of them do not occur. And so you end up running out of data in some sense before you can build an n-gram model. So the big advance that allowed large language models to happen is something called the transformer model. And this was a real breakthrough that provided a way that when we have a sentence like this, so I think that her dowry will run to considerably blank, and we want to generate the next word, the transformer has a way of looking back over all of the preceding words, say in the whole story that you're writing, or the whole text, the whole answer you're generating, and figuring out which words to pay attention to. In some sense, all of these words considerably asks itself, well, what are the words that are relevant to considerably? And run asks itself these questions. I'm saying asks, I'm making it very anthropomorphic. It's a computer program that has been written to do this. But we use statistics to train it to find out what are the important words that help determine the next word. So when it's being trained, it would look at the next word that's there and it would ask, how do I differentiate between the times when it is considerably more or considerably less, right? Probably the two possibilities. And we know that and actually it could be but obviously there are other possibilities too. And so maybe the most important words are things like dowry and think and run. And so I asked Microsoft Copilot to extend this. I said, extend this in the style of a 19th century novel. And so it wrote, dowry will run to considerably more than her father lets on, perhaps 5,000 pounds, if the rumors are to be credited. It is a tidy sum, sufficient to attract attention among the county families, and not without its influence on the calculations of certain gentlemen who have lately taken an interest in her walks and conversation. So this is just incredible that this statistical model, by having the ability to look way back, so by the time it's generating a word like certain gentlemen, it still knows it's talking about dowries, right? Mm. So I mean, I don't know how it gets to walks and conversation. that must be relating to she, but you know, it's in fact this question of where do these words come from? Where do these phrases come from? How does it know to talk about county families? This is the problem of attribution. What were the training, in this case, what were the sentences? Microsoft Copilot has been trained on millions of books, and so where is it getting this from? You know, Sense and Sensibility, something else. But I can look in our Sherlock Holmes documents, and I can find at least this sentence, that her dowry will run to considerably over 6 figures with expectancies for the future. I mean, 6 figures in pounds, that's a massive dowry. But in any case, so maybe, of course, the Microsoft Copilot was trained on Sherlock Holmes, and so it has read this sentence, and it has tried to learn how to predict each subsequent word based on everything in the context. Okay, so these large language models are trained on massive amounts of text. This is from the GPT-4 report, I think, describing a data set called the pile, which is 800 gigabytes of words, and includes all of medical scientific literature. Archive is computer science and mathematics and physics. This is some sort of compendium of law cases, the US Patent Office, a bunch of websites, Wikipedia, a bunch of computer program code from something called GitHub, subtitles for movies, on and on. And so it has essentially read everything that has been published by human beings, and is still somehow accessible online. You may have seen that one of the companies called Anthropic bought basically copies of 1 million books, chopped off the spines, automatically scanned them, and trained on all of those. Google has doing this for years to create their Google Books system, so that they let you search through all these books, and they train on them for this purpose as well. Okay, so we have to think about large language models as being trained to be mimics. Some people call them stochastic parrots, and maybe that's a little bit derogatory, but it's not too far from the truth. They've been trained to mimic human language and also programming languages. And that means they've been trained to be able to generate language about history and philosophy and medicine and law. They've got human language about how to do things. They've been trained on, we speculate on all the YouTube videos and all the speech that was happening in them. So recipes, auto maintenance, plumbing, setting up your television, investing in the stock market. And they can generate plausible answers to questions about all of these. But these answers are not necessarily correct. And I see a question from Dorothy Strang. Why not just read the original book? Seems like a lot of brain work to no important end. Good question. In particular, of course, that is, Google has been a search engine that you give it a question and it tries to find that book that has the answer. And then if that book is available for free, you can look at it. Otherwise, you need to go buy it or take it out of the library and so on. I guess Google has often had trouble, though. It's quite an art to learn how to write good Google queries, right? Sometimes you have to ask several times, and then you have to read a lot of answers. And so people are really enjoying just getting the answer directly. But of course, the problem is that it severs the link between the answer and the source document that is the authority for it. And Diane asked, can you block responses from AI to my searches? Yes, there is a way. I don't remember what it is right now, but there's a way to turn it off. Yeah, in fact, earlier this week, I was asking some questions of Google because I'm trying to set up a TV. That's where this little remark comes from. And the AI answers were coming very slowly, and they just weren't, I didn't want to wait for them. So I really wanted to turn it off because I wasn't going to read them anyway. I was trying to find the manual. So you can do this. But the key thing is here, it's a plausibility engine. It will generate plausible answers to your questions, but these answers are not necessarily correct. Just as you can see that I can generate plausible answers from my language model, but it's not from any real book. It's maybe it's a pastiche of common phrases that have occurred in other books. So so let me talk about 3 shortcomings of large language models. The number one, and I could go on for hours on this, I have a whole talk about it, is the problem that we call hallucination. That a large language model can always generate an answer. It can always roll the dice and choose words. And it knows how things like court cases or the names of medicines or the titles of scientific papers, it knows what these are supposed to look like. And so it can generate fake ones very easily. And it can generate, fake restaurant reviews and so on. So it was pretty soon, it was in April of 2023. So that was 5 months, I think, after GPT-3 was generated, that ChatGPT accused a law professor of sexual assault. It just made it up. It said that he did something on a trip, but he'd never taken that trip. And of course, there's now a website collecting a list of all of the cases where lawyers have made legal arguments based on non-existent law cases because they're relying on these models to do this. And I think they're up to about 150 incidents so far. And when GPT-4, which was the next large language model from OpenAI, when it was generated, they evaluated its hallucination rate and found that it was 40% on this set of very challenging questions called truthful question answering. So why do we call it hallucination? Well, the word really comes from when people were using these computer models to do translation, say from French into English. The English translation might mention something that actually was not in the French document, but was very plausible. It just wasn't there. And so we would say, well, it hallucinated that. It also happens in computer vision where you might ask it, well, what's in this picture? And it will say, well, there's a sink and a faucet and a toothbrush and a mirror. But in fact, the mirror isn't in the image. It's just something that is so common statistically in a picture from a bathroom that it guesses there's a mirror there without any evidence. So that's where the word hallucination comes from. But of course, we now misuse it to really describe almost any mistake that a large language model makes. Another shortcoming I already mentioned is attribution. Standard large language models have no way of linking their output back to the training documents that most influence the answer. And recent advances are making some progress on that. So now when you ask a question to Microsoft or Google, it will usually give links to supporting documents. But you need to open those links and see if they actually do support the answer that was given, because they don't always at all. So it's and then the third shortcoming I want to mention is popularity bias. So you can see that the key idea behind a large language model or any language model is what's more common versus what's less common. And so back last year, I asked ChatGPT about the pre-Columbian population of grazing animals in South America. Don't ask why, I was having a discussion, but how many llamas were there in South America before Columbus? It answered with the estimated human population. So it misunderstood my question. And I would guess that this is because when people ask this kind of question, they're always asking about how many people lived, what was the pre-Columbian human population. So it basically hallucinated my question into and answered the wrong one. Like a good PhD student doing their defense. The question you really are asking is about humans. So it makes that mistake. Another famous problem is to ask these systems, which is larger, 9.5 or 9.11? And almost all the time, right? I mean, 9.5 is 9.5, 9.11 is 9 1/10, but they will almost always answer 9.11. And it's really puzzled people for a while why. It seems that that because of popularity, it was interpreting 9.11 as a date, right? Because that's often how it would be written, especially in Europe. And that was a very popular common date. Popular is maybe not the right term, but a very common date referring to the September 11th attacks. And so that confused the model, and so it would decide that that's the answer, really because it's just more common. And this problem of statistical bias, we will come back to again in a few minutes. So the most important point I want you to take away from my talk today is never trust the output of these large language models. For anything important, always check the web pages or other links that Google and Bing provide, and see if they support the answer. Because unfortunately, the answers come out in beautifully, coherent, clean English, perfectly spelled. And we definitely, they sort of talk like an authority figure. They're very confident. In fact, studies show that they are overconfident. And so we tend to trust them because they sound smart, but they're not smart. They are regurgitating and confabulating various sources. The amazing thing is that they're actually right a fair amount of the time. But as I say, for anything important, you better check their work. So there are other systems that are not language models, but are using very similar techniques, and these are for images and for videos and for speech. So it is now possible to just generate fake images. So there's a website called thispersondoesnotexist.com, and you can go there, and every 10 minutes or every 10 seconds or something, it'll generate a picture of a new person. None of them exist. They're all just synthetic images They've been trained on millions of pictures of people, and they can generate new images. A famous one was this one of the Pope wearing a giant puffy jacket, that puffy coat that circulated around the web. But we see them being used to generate misinformation. And now they can produce videos with people speaking, videos of people speaking in a person's voice. So it would be extremely easy now to produce a video of any one of us talking, make a video of the President of the United States saying something that was never said, right? And it would be very hard to tell that fake synthesis from the real thing. So this problem of automated mimicry is creating a huge challenge, I think, for us as a society. We have fake people. And probably one of my colleagues at Arizona State was a victim of a fake kidnapping attack. She gets a phone call from someone who's claimed to have kidnapped her daughter, and she's able to have a conversation with her daughter, quote unquote, but it was actually an AI fake conversation with her daughter's voice having been cloned. She was halfway through arranging to pay a ransom when she got wise to the fact that it was all a scam. So this is absolutely terrifying. But some of you may be already getting so-called phishing attacks, where you're getting email or text messages or social media or phone calls that are scams of various kinds. The advertising companies have a problem with fake customers clicking on their ads. Actually, not, because their competitors may hire or rent fake customers to click on their competitors' ads, costing them money. It's a nasty thing. But in my field, we're getting fake scientific papers, of course, fake legal briefs, fake customer reviews. There's a website that will let you generate fake credit card receipts for your travel expenses. And of course, in schools, we're getting all kinds of fake homework assignments.
Tom,
Yes.
can I interrupt here?
Sure, please.
I'm learning an awful lot here all at once. And when I went to school as a youngster, we had desks that had inkwells in them. And we wrote with pens, and we used those inkwells. I think sometimes we used the inkwells to dunk the girls' pigtails who sat in front of us.
I'm sure you never
Turn
did
them
that.
purple or something. But at any rate, teachers were trying to teach me how to think. And the tools we had at that time were pretty basic writing tools.
Yeah.
Well, now, if I understand you correctly, you've spent your life trying to teach machines how to think, if that's the right word.
Yeah, close enough.
And that's and you've been trying to help us understand a little of what goes into teaching a machine how to form a sentence,
Right.
for example.
But I'm not sure. Yeah, but I'm not sure this is
sense.
thinking.
Anyway, that's a big job. A lot of the people you're talking to right now are in their 70s and 80s and maybe 90s. And we're trying to keep up with a world that is changing very rapidly. And artificial intelligence is a phrase none of us would have used in a sentence a couple of years ago, but now we find ourselves using it. And even more to the point, most of us use Google. And
Sure.
I think Google does an awful lot with artificial intelligence.
Yeah, they've used AI techniques behind the scenes for years. One of their biggest challenges actually is to distinguish fake websites from real websites, because there are people trying to scam Google into returning their website as the answer to a question, right?
Oh my goodness.
And so they have been kind of dealing with this problem for a long time. Now, of course, it was actually Google who invented this transformer large language model technology. So, so now they're having to deal with their own invention. And I would say as a field, we, and particularly as professors, are having to deal with the problem we caused ourselves. And of course, what's the big response? Ban all electronics from the classroom, give people blue books with paper and pencil, and have them write in class, and also have oral exams. Because as you say, the point of writing isn't to generate words. The point of writing is to think about your arguments and learn to think, learn to reason. And actually, these large language models do not have what I would call a theory of knowledge or of understanding. They don't know why something would be true versus false, or why you should trust one source of information more than another. They've been just fed all this stuff, and they just sort of conduct a popularity contest among everything they've read, and then spit it back to you. And so this is now we're getting all of this fake stuff out there, and then training the next generation of large language models on the fake stuff, and so they'll generate even more fake stuff. And this is may rapidly make this technology useless. So actually getting a hold of things that were written before the period of AI will turn out to be more and more valuable, and getting things written by actual human beings will be extremely valuable. So it could be that writing by humans may become increasingly valuable over time because of its authenticity, its coherence, and the knowledge behind it, the reasoning behind it. So it'll be interesting to see. I just want to mention one other thing, which is another consequence of large language models is low quality software. So one of the very cool things has been that large language models are very good at writing computer code. I mean, computer code is written in computer languages. They are much more structured and much simpler than English. And so it turns out that the large language models can learn to write them much better than they can generate English. And so they can serve as a kind of autocomplete or autocorrect as a programmer is programming. And a program can even describe something they want, and then have the LLM write the program for them. But studies have shown that those programs often have bugs in them, or they're insecure, so they could be attacked by a cyber attacker. And this is because they've been trained on buggy and insecure code, and so that's what they've learned to do. So there's a concern that we will also have an explosion of low quality software, but generated very cheaply. You get what you pay for. And then there's a worry, and this maybe relates to your question, Dad, which is this problem of de-skilling, the extent to which we delegate our writing and our reasoning and our programming to LLMs. We lose our skill at doing it ourselves. So we can see that programmers trusting large language models to write code do not learn to do it well themselves. And so the big question is, going forth into the future, what are the skills that we as humans need to have versus what are the skills that we can safely outsource to AI? Nowadays, only a few people need to know how to raise and train horses, whereas this used to be knowledge that everybody needed to have. So the question is writing software like raising horses, where we only need a small number of people who can do it well? Or is it something much more essential where everyone needs to do it? I'm running out of time, and I want to leave more time for questions. So let me just, there's so many things to say here. I guess these are 5 sort of alternative views of where we might be going. One area that is the least troubling is building better tools for people so that people can make better decisions, create better products, better drugs, and so on. And we call that tool AI. And another one that seems like it maybe is relevant is that we now have these systems that have read all of human written knowledge in some sense. And can we use them as an approximate so-called knowledge base, or as a replacement for Wikipedia? Or can we use them to make Wikipedia more complete and correct? And then we talked about translation. The other area that's very active right now in companies is making personal assistants, or they call them agents. But imagine you could have an agent that could read all of your bills and pay them automatically, check them to see if they make sense and pay them, or to reconcile all your medical bills and figure out what's being paid by insurance and what you need to pay, and that kind of thing. So people imagine from that going all the way up to having an automated employee in a company that could do routine things like reordering office supplies or automatically configuring supply chains, buying parts and products and so on. And then, of course, there's the autonomous robots. And so we're seeing, on my campus, let me skip ahead a little bit. I have a picture. We have these things running around my campus, which are these food delivery robots. And they may be at the U of C too, I don't know. And one of my colleagues is working on, at Agility Robotics, his startup company, on these humanoid robots that can do factory, simple warehouse work, like picking up bins and moving around, stacking boxes, stuff like that. And perhaps the scariest prospect is the AI that's coming out of the Russia-Ukraine war. They are now building taking these quadcopters, which are off-the-shelf products, and modifying them to become autonomous, so that they can autonomously recognize a target or fly to a pre-programmed target and then destroy that target by a kamikaze, explosion, or by dropping an explosive charge on it. And they need to be able to operate without radio contact because, of course, there's so much jamming in the battlefield now that they need this autonomy. But the result is we will soon live in a world where these are widely accessible, not only to militaries, but to the criminals, to police, and so on. So we need to figure out how we're going to live in that world and how we'll enforce, regulate laws, and so forth. So maybe I better stop there. There's so many other things I could talk about. But let me close with, in the first Trump administration, the Office of Science and Technology Policy output a sort of draft AI Bill of Rights. And this is a Bill of Rights for people, not for AIs. It's for people dealing with artificial intelligence. And they argued that we should have these 5 rights. We should have a right to safe and effective systems, to be protected against algorithmic discrimination. So I had to skip over, but a big problem with face recognition is that it is much less accurate on people with darker skin. And so what that means is that if you're Black and you're going through TSA, it's probably the chances of it making a mistake on you are going to be higher. You're going to be pulled out and asked a bunch of questions. And so life becomes miserable. I mean, it's not the worst thing that could happen, but these kinds of identity mistakes, especially if they're used in policing, could be hazardous or even lethal. So, and this carries over not just to face recognition, but to anything. So if we think about disease diagnosis by computer, every one of us is likely at some point in our lives to have something rare, medically speaking. And the trouble is that because these models are statistical in their background, they tend to overpredict the more common cases and underpredict the rare cases. And so you may get misdiagnosed because you're just a minority in some medical sense. And so it's very important that we deal with this problem of algorithmic bias. And then, of course, there's the problem of privacy. Notice that you should know when and how automated systems are being used in any service you use, and you should have the right to a human alternative when the automation fails. That is to say, the burden of software failures should not fall on the general public, but on the companies that are using it. So I will stop there and answer more questions, and I'm sorry I ran so long. What else can I discuss?
I have a question. I've read that AI uses a tremendous amount of energy, and with the whole problem of climate change, this could be a real disadvantage. And so are there any methods being used to decrease the amount of energy that I...
Yes. Well, as you can imagine, companies like Google and Microsoft are paying a fortune for the energy that they're using. And so they are extremely motivated to figure out how to make these models run more efficiently. And so, the first models that came out in 2022, 2023 were very inefficient and extremely brute force. People were so excited about this capability to generate and understand language, in quotes, understand, that they pushed these things out, but they were extremely expensive to train just in terms of the amount of energy, power, and water that was consumed. They are now probably 1,000 times more efficient than they were then. And this is partly because the NVIDIA company, which makes the computers, the specialized computers that are used for these, has been making their computers more and more energy efficient. And the algorithms have also become much more efficient. And so, as I say, there's, I think that we'll continue to get another maybe factor of 100 or 1,000 improvement. That said, there's this, I can't remember the name of the effect, but when you make something cheaper, demand can go up for it. It's just like when you add more lanes to a freeway, it doesn't always make travel faster because more people drive on the road and it can slow things down. And so it's a kind of paradox. And so it's unclear. One thing we are seeing is that because there's a huge investment in new data centers right now, both for this and for cryptocurrencies, which is another equally large consumer of energy. That's raising electric bills for all of us. And I think that the government should be regulating that and saying, no, we as consumers, we'll pay for the energy that we use when we use your service, but we don't want, cryptocurrencies to be raising our electric bills. And that's why I'm appalled that the current administration, running away from solar power and wind power, because those are now the cheapest ways to generate electricity.
Well, speaking of which, I'm very concerned, especially given that you really can't trust what you used to trust to be factual. We're in really a difficult place when it comes to going to the library and picking out a book. How do you know where the authors have gotten their information? You used to be able to assume it was okay, but now what do you have to do? Research everything yourself?
Well, yeah. One thing that I think might be a sort of grand challenge for my field is, using large language models, we should be able to now go through the medical literature and try to trace back through all of the experiments and studies that have been done to understand why we believe or do not believe certain things, right? This wouldn't be just large language models by themselves. We would have to make many other advances because we'd have to, teach computers or program computers about why should they trust one thing over another. But check the provenance of everything that what we believe and be able to then establish that chain. We would probably discover that there are several things that science believes that are not correct, or vice versa, that we discover things that have been lost that we should believe. And wouldn't it be great if we could place human knowledge on a stronger foundation than what has been the past? Because we're going to need that chain of authority to deal with this problem of, where are the things that we're reading now? How can I, usually in a scientific paper, you obviously have citations to things, but you also have a description of the experiments that you did. And in many cases, you want to then be able to replicate those experiments. In computer science, we're lucky because the software to replicate an experiment can be made available online. And now it's expected that when you publish a paper, you publish all of the data and the software needed to reproduce the paper. We can't do that with the large language models, unfortunately, because the data is so huge and the computer cost is so great that no one can afford to replicate. But there we have many companies, both in the US and in China, but also in France and other countries, building large language models so we can get some sense of replication there. But when you're doing an experiment in medicine, you can't easily replicate that. Right now, for instance, it's very hard to find people who haven't had COVID. So how do you test new COVID vaccines? You have to have new strategies for that. So some science can't be replicated. Anyway, I'm going too long, but this question of what we can believe and what not is critical. All the companies that do the image synthesis and so on have developed techniques for what they call watermarking, where they can essentially digitally sign what they've written in a way, and you can check their digital signature. It's something called the Content Provenance Initiative. And I think in the next few years, we will see that the web browsers, for instance, when they put them in an image, will be able to say, this image was generated by an AI system, and here, it was generated by Google, and here's the signature. Or this comes from a scientific paper, and it was an image that went through Photoshop, and before that, it was produced by this microscope, manufactured by this company. And so or it was photographed by an iPhone owned by Thomas Dietterich on, September 10th, 2025 in Corvallis, Oregon. So you will have that chain of provenance. But then if there's an image that was that is a bad image, it won't have a signature on it, and so you shouldn't trust it. So hopefully we will be able to have that kind of confidence in things.
Tom, someone
yes.
asked in the chat if you could show the ethical slide again.
Yes. Let me go back to that. Oops, how do I need to get my mouse over here, I guess. Ethical considerations. So I talked about the problem of bias already, but basically, if you're a part of any data minority in some sense, where there's just less data about you or people like you out there, then these systems will make more mistakes. There's also a problem that there's bias in the data itself. So it's been very tempting to try to do predictive policing. That is to say, well, where should we deploy police officers because we think it's more likely that crime will occur in this area. That's fine, except that how is that predictive policing model trained? It was trained on historical policing data. And so it's going to send more police where we've sent police in the past. And that may reflect racial stereotyping or whatever. And so there's a problem that it is biased data. And from biased data, you will only get biased results. With loan approvals, you have the same problem. You'll learn all this technology in some sense is always looking at the past. And it's hoping that the future is like the past. And so future policing, future insurance, future loan paybacks will relate to what happened in the past. So to the extent that the world is changing all the time, these models will start will become more and more, make more and more mistakes, need to be updated, and it'll always be playing catch up. But the other question is, well, who's responsible for the actions of an AI system, whether it's the text that it outputs or other things, like with a self-driving car that's involved in a crash? Is it the person inside the car that is responsible, or the owner, or the manufacturer, or the people who wrote the software, or what else? Some of you may read Stephen Vladeck, who writes a lot about the Supreme Court. He has put forward a proposal that the car itself should be a legal entity that has to carry insurance, so that if you are harmed by a car, you can sue the car and get your payout and have your harm addressed, and not have to sue all the other people and then let the insurance company decide whether the owner or the manufacturer or the authors should have to pay the premiums. I kind of like that idea, except I don't like the idea of a car being some kind of a legal person, because an AI system is not a person, and we want to have a very bright line there, I think. And so that brings us to this whole question of human dignity. That we see now AI systems being used as doing various kinds of emotional work. AI boyfriends and girlfriends, AI psychotherapists, and AI companions, say, particularly maybe for the elderly or dementia patients and so on. Is that an ethically acceptable behavior? It troubles me a lot. There are some field trials suggesting that as that AI therapists can have a benefit, but it is fake empathy. So is simulated empathy something we want to have. The other problem is that I think like everything in our economy, companies will be trying to find where are the weaknesses in humans that will make them engage in addictive behavior that they can make money off of. And this is, I think, we see it in advertising all the time, now in politics, but boy, it's super dangerous here. There are studies showing that you can make extremely persuasive AI systems. They can persuade people to stop believing in conspiracy theories or start believing in conspiracy theories. And so emotional and psychological manipulation seems to need very stiff regulation.
Orwell. It's
So,
Orwell,
yeah.
Orwellian.
Yes.
So then, right now there's a lot of philosophers engaged in, could computers ever become moral agents? And the trouble is we don't really understand what makes humans moral agents. Is it our consciousness? Is it our free will?
Yeah.
I mean, according to Genesis, it was a gift from God. Is it that we are capable of being punished? We don't have a way of punishing a computer for doing the wrong thing. I've seen robot soccer players that violate the rules of the soccer game, and they're put into the penalty box for a while, but they're just replaced with another robot of exactly the same programming. So that doesn't do anything. So the current consensus is that no AI system is capable of being a moral agent, and I think it should stay that way. So,
Amen.
okay.
Yeah.
Other questions?
Well, I'm very glad that this has been recorded. I think I need to watch it about 4 or 5 more times. But I
Yeah,
want
I
to
talk quickly.
I want to thank you for doing this and for using language that we can all understand, even if we don't understand the concepts. And I'm curious, I understand that somebody in this field, if you say are sick or drop out for a year or two, it moves so fast. How do you get back into your field?
It's a wild ride, right? The literature is exploding. Even if you remove the papers that are fake, the literature is exploding. So yeah, none of us are able to keep up with everything. But the research community has grown, and so you're hoping that enough people are reading enough papers that we can find things. We rely on AI recommender systems to say, oh, here's some papers that you should read. But it is extremely challenging. Yeah.
But you got into this field really early. What attracted you to it?
Well, I was attracted. I had read some philosophy of science as an undergraduate, and I had a liberal arts training, which is kind of unusual in computer science. Most people have engineering or physics background.
That's
So,
why you can speak to us so clearly, huh?
well, thank you. I'm sure I've used some buzzwords here that I should have avoided, but I was really curious about the philosophy of science and how is it that one philosopher of science described the central problem in the field of philosophy of science is how did we get from our common sense understanding of the world to quantum mechanics through a series of rational steps? Because quantum mechanics seems completely crazy and so invisible and divorced from our everyday life. How did we, is it sort of an arbitrary random thing, or is it something that could be thought of as a series of reasoned steps? And so, working on AI and particularly machine learning, because I was one of the first graduate students to work in machine learning, was the path to try to understand that. And now I have to say that at this point in my career, I think that when we see all of the shortcomings, so in just the last 5 years, well, really since 2010, machine learning has completely taken over artificial intelligence. And where instead of programming our computers by writing code, we use vast amounts of data to train the computer, to teach the computer to mimic things, to produce the answers that we want it to produce. And so at first it was gratifying. And imagine that companies start investing billions and billions and billions of dollars in taking the technology that my colleagues and I have developed and applying it at unimagined scales. And it doesn't work. In some sense, it has failed. It leads to the problems that we were discussing of the, these low quality software and automated mimicry, and just the level of understanding is very shallow in these models. They can read, one of my colleagues yesterday wrote on social media, a student finishing an undergraduate degree in physics can solve more problems, physics problems, than a large language model that has read every physics paper and every physics book ever written. So in some sense, the large language model should know more, but it can do less. And it's because you can have large language models that can tell you what the rules of chess are, but they can't play a legal chess game. So in some sense, these models are not learning the way we do. They don't learn general principles or general rules in a way that is usable. They just kind of memorize stuff and they parrot it back. So they're just like a bad student with a prodigious memory. And so I think my field is in a time of crisis, because to build computer programs that have a deeper understanding and therefore will not make a lot of these mistakes is a big open challenge. Then there's another part of me that says, well, maybe it's better if we don't build those systems. Maybe we want systems that have just certain capabilities we understand and we can use them as tools, but we avoid all of the complexities, the moral and ethical complexities of building autonomous systems. And so I think there's a lot of soul searching going on right now in my field, and definitely people leaving the field, new people coming in. It's a complicated time.
Well, it sounds like that's a good place to end, Tom.
Okay.
Both
But I think if I've learned anything today, it's that all of us should understand this stuff more than we do, because it needs some human beings to kind of regulate. And as you say, with the Bill of Rights. And so we shouldn't just dismiss AI, us older folks, but we ought to use our knowledge and wisdom and experience to interact with it and both appreciate but also regulate. You certainly opened a whole new world for us. So
Thank you.
thank
Thank you
you.
for your attention and your questions. And I'm glad it was helpful.